Hello. Today we're going to be in Joshua chapter 20 and 21 that basically deals with the Levitical cities and the cities of refuge. There's a tremendous amount of theology here because of the purpose of these cities in the life of Israel. So I hope you'll get your Bibles and follow with me today. Then the Lord spoke to Joshua. And of course we have two possibilities here as always, that God spoke directly to Joshua as he did to Moses, verbal communication. Or that we know that Joshua was to go to Eleazar the priest, and through the Urim and the Thummim was to know God's will, Exodus 28:30, which it is here. It seems to me to be verbal communication. The Lord said to Joshua, saying, "Speak to the sons of Israel." And of course, Jacob's name was changed to Israel. Get the sons of Israel from Jacob's name change. Designate the cities of refuge. Now, these cities of refuge are very interesting. There's to be 6 of them. There are already 3 that have been appointed on the eastern side of the Jordan River. Now, there are 3 wonderful parallel passages that help us really understand this. You might want to see Exodus chapter 21, verses 12 through 14, Numbers 35, this is probably the most significant one, 10 through 28, and Deuteronomy 19, 1 through 13. Now, here we have this again in Joshua, the 4th account of this, so these are very important things in the life of Israel. Now, originally, the place of refuge was the horns of the sacrificial altar. Now, as you know, the sacrificial altar was right at the front of the east door to the tabernacle. It was a large bronze altar, and on each end were these little horns or protrusions that were the holiest part of the altar because the blood was smeared there. And a man could go there and hold on to those horns as a place of safety. We see that in 1 Kings chapter 1, 50 through 53, and 1 Kings 2, 28 and 31. There's also an example of this in Exodus 21:14. So this kind of city of refuge is replacing this holding on to the altar, of which I spoke to you through Moses. And this was something obviously goes back to either Deuteronomy 19 or the passages in Numbers or Exodus. Now, Moses had already set 3 cities in the Trans-Jordan or on the eastern bank of the Jordan, and we learned that from Deuteronomy 4, 41 and following. There are 3 more to be numbered. Now, that the manslayer who kills any person unintentionally without premeditation may flee there, and they shall become your refuge from the blood avenger. This is very significant theology. Do you think there's some kind of symbolism in the fact there are 6 cities of refuge? 6 is the number in the Bible. That's 1 less than 7. 7 is the number of perfection because it goes back to the creation of Genesis 1 and 2. And 1 less than perfection is human imperfection. Matter of fact, the Antichrist of the New Testament is 666, a superlative of imperfection. There are 6 cities here because this is related to a man even unintentionally killing another. Now, notice if you would, it says, who kills a person unintentionally without premeditation. Now, we have seen this several times, and I want to give you a series of passages that are going to be very important to you. I hope you'll get your pencil ready or look at our outline that we provide with these lessons. Starting with the book of Leviticus, Leviticus chapter 4, verse 2, verse 27, verse 2, verse 22, and verse 27, Leviticus 5:15, Leviticus 22:14, Numbers 15:27 through 31, Deuteronomy 4:42, and Deuteronomy 19:4. Now, the reason I have given you that much as testation in other scriptures is that this unintentionality is a very important aspect of the sacrificial system of Israel. Psalm 51:17, David, after premeditatively taking another man's wife, having that man killed, covering it up, if you please, says, God, I would bring you sacrifice if I could, but a broken and contrite spirit you will not reject. What does that mean? There was no sacrifice for David. Even the Day of Atonement, Leviticus 16, was only for sins of ignorance, sins of passion, sins of accident, not for premeditated sin. There is no Old Testament sacrifice for premeditated, known sin. I believe the King James translation calls it the sin of the high hand. Isn't that surprising? Aren't you glad we're under grace? because most of my problem is open-eyed rebellion against God. Now, notice where it mentions here that he may flee, and there he shall become your refuge. The word refuge basically has the idea of a gathering together. Matter of fact, down here, see if I can find the right verse. Yes, down here where it says to take him into the city, verse 4, that take him into the city, to gather someone together to yourself. That's what the word refuge really means. They're going to not only give him a place to flee, but a place to live in safety. And the reason for that is this blood avenger. Now the word here in Hebrew is goel. We see it, I guess, most predominantly and most beautifully in the book of Ruth, where Boaz becomes the kinsman redeemer, is another word for the translation for this goel, where he wants to buy back Ruth's property and marry Ruth. You see that in Ruth chapter 3, verse 13. There are some other places in the Old Testament where we see this goel, the kinsman redeemer, or the blood avenger. And you might want to see, Leviticus 25:25, Numbers 5:8, and Jeremiah 32:7. I think the first time we see this concept that a near relative is not only to help this family, but is also to be the one responsible for the revenge of any kind of murder to a clan or family. We see, I guess, at first in the life of Cain, where God dispels Cain, but Cain says, if someone finds me, they'll kill me, and God gives him a special mark of protection. We find that in Genesis 4:14. And then we see it again in Genesis 9:5 and 6. And I think it becomes very significant that in Hebrew law, basically, they were trying to limit this blood feud between the tribes. And so they went to a thing called an eye for an eye, which means if you put out my brother's eye, I put out your eye. You knocked my brother's tooth out, I knocked your tooth out. You kill one of my brothers, I kill one of your brothers. Now that sounds very cruel to us, but the truth is that was a very limiting way of revenge. We often hear about the Hatfields and the McCoys of Arkansas or something, and where one person would get killed, the clan would wipe out a whole family, and then that clan would wipe out a whole city, and it just escalated revenge between family groups. So an eye for an eye was meant to limit that. And yet, what happens if somebody is innocent? What if they did it unintentionally? What if it was an accident? Is there no way for them to be spared? Well, that's what these cities of refuge are for. A man who did not do it intentionally could flee there. This is one reason why I believe that in the Ten Commandments, where it says, thou shalt not kill, we've got to retranslate that. For the blood avenger was legal, premeditated murder within Israel. He had the right and the responsibility of tracking this person down who killed one of his family members and executing them. That's why I think that commandment should be translated non-legal, premeditated murder. Now, notice, if you will, where it mentions here, and he shall flee to one of these cities, and he shall stand at the entrance of the gate of the city. Now, why the entrance of the gate? Well, there's two things going to happen here. Number one, the elders of the city are going to hear this man's case. Now, to come inside the gate meant he was protected. And there, the gate was the place of judicial justice, the place where decisions were made for the whole community. So the elders would meet there. We see it as Lot met at the gate of the city many other times in the Old Testament. It's a place of justice. So the elders are to take him in and to listen to his complaint. We see it, I guess, even clearer down here in verse 6, where it says he's to stand before the congregation until the death of the one who is the high priest. Well, first of all, the elders had to decide if the case was worthy to be heard by the whole congregation, the whole assembly. Now, does this mean the assembly of the elders or the assembly of the whole town? We're not real sure in verse 6. It could be either one. Does it mean the town of the city of refuge, or does it mean the town where the crime was committed? Well, a very good converted rabbi named Alfred Edersheim interprets verse 6 as meaning the city where the crime was committed. And he probably bases that on Numbers 35, verses 24 and 25, that seems to imply that. But the general context here in Joshua 20 seems to imply that the city of refuge elders or group of elders, or maybe even the whole city itself, will finally give this man a trial. If it is proved that he really did it accidentally, unintentionally, without foreknowledge and planning, then he is given a place to live in this city. That's what verse 4 is all about. And they shall take him into the city. There's a play on that Hebrew word for a city of refuge, to take someone in. And give them a place, a house, so that they may dwell among them. Now, I think it's quite interesting that they're going to have to stay in that place until the death of the high priest. Even if they're innocent, they're going to have to stay there until the death of the high priest. Now, why is that? Well, a person has still been killed. It's still a manslaughter charge. And there's going to be some punishment involved. Now, the punishment is the man must live in this city of refuge, leave his tribal allocation, live in this city of refuge, apparently with his immediate family, have a house among the Levites, apparently. For these cities were not, although they're called cities of refuge, not only Levites lived there, but apparently there was a quarter of the city, or a part of the city, where the Levites lived. He would live there. Now, here's two things, I think. Number one, how would you like to live among a community of Bible teachers? For that's what the Levites were. These Levitical cities spread out. There's 48 of them. Only 6 of them are cities of refuge. But the Levites were spread all over the Promised Land to teach the local people the law. Here's a man who's committed murder. He's going to be placed, if you please, in a seminary with all these teachers around. Implication, he's going to learn the law while he's there. And there's a time element. He's got to stay in this place. If he leaves out and the blood avenger finds him, he can kill him legally. He's got to stay there until the death of the high priest, and then he can go home. Now, someone said it's a high priest death in a sacrificial sense. No, I think it's just judicial time limit on this. Being the high priest is kind of dangerous. A lot of folks be praying for you to die of these manslaughter cases. So now, if the blood avenger pursues him, and they shall not deliver the manslayer into his hands, because he struck his neighbor without premeditation and did not hate him beforehand. And that's a very important distinction, I think. By the way, these elders are to investigate this crime very extensively. We might want to see Deuteronomy 19:18 for the thorough investigation they are to give to this. It's not a light thing. Verse 6, and he shall dwell in the city until he stands before the congregation. You might want to see Numbers 35:12 for a little more closer adaptation of this. And until the death of the one who is the high priest in those days. Then the manslayer shall return to his own city, to his own house, to the city from which he fled. So then he's free. The statute of limitations is up. It was interesting to me as I read these other parallels. In Deuteronomy 19:3, it says, make the road smooth to the city of refuge. Why? Well, they're spread out strategically, centrally throughout the Promised Land, and the roads are to be straight. Give these people a chance to get there. Make the way easy for them to get there. I think that's important. So they set apart, and of course the word set apart here is a play on the word. The second word is Kadesh in Galilee, and of course Kadosh is the Hebrew word for holy or set apart. It's kind of a play on these two words. And of course these cities are set apart, and the word set apart means to set apart for a particular purpose. And these cities are for a particular purpose, to protect the innocent in the system of justice. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but I want you to notice the 3 here in verse 7 are the 3 new ones that Moses did not appoint because he was not in the Promised Land. And there's one in Galilee, and there's one in Ephraim, and there's one down in Judah. And you can make a note of those. And then verse 8, we have the 3 that are in the Transjordan area. Now there is another list of these same cities found in 1 Chronicles 6, 54 through 81 of Levitical cities, and it changes some. Matter of fact, we don't know where a lot of these cities are. Some of them we do, but many of them we simply do not. Verse 9, and there were appointed cities for all the sons of Israel, and for the strangers who sojourn among them. Not only is the Mosaic legislation concerned with the innocent one, but it's concerned with the non-Hebrew one, the stranger, the sojourner, the alien among them. In this context, it probably is the mixed multitude that came out of Egypt with him, or the slaves that Hebrews have purchased from other groups. But God is concerned with them too, and they have a place to flee. They have a legal system to protect them. That whoever kills any person unintentionally, there's the key, may flee there and not die by the hand of the avenger of blood until he stands before the congregation. Now, if the congregation decides that he has killed premeditatively, that he did it with the sin of the high hand, he's turned over to the relatives of the slain person to be executed immediately. Now, verse 21. I am assuming that all of these cities that are going to be mentioned in the next chapter were finally conquered. Now, and by that I mean this. I think Joshua gave these Levitical cities, 48 of them, 6 are cities of refuge, while he was still allotting the land to all the tribes. Chapter 13 through 19 is the dividing of the land. Now we know that if you compare Joshua and Judges, it seems that Joshua broke the main resistance of the Canaanites, but that every tribe, Judges says, had to occupy their own territory. And we know from history that many of these cities that are given as Levitical cities were never fully occupied by the Hebrews. Well, I think Joshua gave them on the basis that they would be occupied. It's assuming the Israeli people are going to conquer their own tribal allocation, and we know they didn't. Now, let's look at this, if we could. Then the heads of the households of the Levites. Now, the Levites, of course, are the children of Levi, who is the second son of Jacob, Reuben, Levi, and Judah. Now, there are 3 main families of the Levites, and we see them here. The first is mentioned in verse 10, the Kohathites. Now, the Kohathites are not only mentioned in verse 10, a particular group of them, the sons of Aaron, are going to be the priest. But down in verse 20, we have the sons of Kohath again, but this is another group of that same family. And then we have in verse 27, the sons of Gershom. That's another group of Levites. And then over here in verse 34, we have the third, which is the Merari. And there's the 3 main tribes. So these are the kinds of tribal groups that came before them. Now, these Levitical cities are mentioned in Numbers 35:6, and you might want to compare that. And again, another list is found in 1 Chronicles 6, 54 through 81, though somewhat different from this list, probably based on the fact that many of these cities were not really conquered from the Canaanites. Approached Eleazar the priest and Joshua the son of Nun and the heads of the households of the tribes of the sons of Israel. And they spoke to them at Shiloh. Now we know from chapter 18, verse 1, that the tabernacle was moved to Shiloh. That's one of the holy sites in the north, and this is the place, apparently, the tabernacle was sitting. Of the land of Canaan, saying, the Lord commanded through Moses to give us cities to live in with their pasture lands for cattle. Now we learn from back in Moses they're to have 1,000 cubits away from the city. Now it's really my understanding, based on verse 3, which again mentions these pasture lands and the cities, that in Numbers 35:4 it says 1,000 cubits away from the city wall. And yet I'm not sure that these cities were totally populated by Levites, and I want to tell you why. The first one is, when you look at Hebron, that's mentioned in verse 11, okay, as a Levitical city, we also know that Caleb was given Hebron as a tribal allocation, 1 Chronicles 6, 55 and 56. So apparently Caleb had part of the city, and the Levites had part of the city. Well, why? Oh, by the way, before I get any further, the other one I think is the elders of the cities and the priest heard the case in verse 4, which tells me there's more than just Levites. There are elders who are not of the tribe of Levi. Elders of the city also heard the case. It implies there's more than just Levites in that city. Now, the pasture land was for the purpose that Levites did not get any tribal allocation, but they needed some land to grow some crops to help supplement their income. Now, for the priest, they got the food from the altar, but the Levites, there was a special tithe for the Levites locally, and they needed to grow and supplement their family's food. And this 1,000 cubits is basically enough area for them to have a little farm plot and keep a few sheep or cattle if they wanted to for food. Now, a cubit is distance between a man's longest finger and his elbow, about 18 inches, so you can get the idea how far this was, maybe 1,500 feet from the city walls. And notice it says, and the lot came out for the families of the Kohathites. Now, the lot, we're not sure exactly what the lot is. We think the lot is connected with the Urim and the Thummim, but we're not certain of that, and we're not exactly sure what it is. Maybe like a couple of dice or a white rock and a black rock out of a pouch. We're not sure. But this lot was done to allocate all the tribes from chapter 13 through chapter 19. This was God's way of saying, I'm going to give you the part of the land that I want you to have. We see this lot still in the New Testament time when the church tried to replace Judas Iscariot and cast lots among some qualified men, and the lot fell on Matthias. It was God's way. But I want to say to you, this is not something we should do to know God's will. We shouldn't get a white rock and a black rock and put it in a pouch and pull one out on every decision and say, now I know the will of God and I'm being biblical because Joshua did it and Peter did it in the New Testament. No. Just like Gideon's fleece in the book of Judges, that was an act of unbelief, not belief. So we're led because we have the full revelation of God and the indwelling Holy Spirit. We don't need the lot anymore. Now, so they divided this up, and then the rest of this chapter is going to show you basically how many cities, Levitical cities, were given in each tribal group and where these cities are located. And again, you can look on the map and find some of these, although several of them we have no idea where they are. Several of them are very large cities, very important cities of the area, which show me the Levites did not fully occupy these towns. Now, if we go to verse 9 and verse 10, we talk about the sons of Aaron. That's one of the particular families among the Kohathites. Now, we learn from other parts of the Bible that this, of course, is going to be the family of the priest. This is going to be Aaron's family. The high priest will come from this group. Also, the other priest will come from this group. To be a priest, you had to be a Levite, but not all Levites are priests. Now, the other Levites are going to be teachers in these local scattered out areas, and they're also, part of them are going to carry different parts of the tabernacle when they moved. All right? You can read through here these different cities. I'm not going to go through all them. But it's interesting that the tribal, the Levitical cities for the Aaron's sons are all close to Jerusalem around Judah. And of course, Jerusalem is not set aside until much later. But I'm sure God knew Jerusalem be set aside, and he wanted these priests to be close to their work, I think. And that's why these areas of Judah and Benjamin are the allocations for the sons of Aaron. Now, the second part of this family is found in verse 20, Kohath. Now, there wasn't too many of these folks left, because if you know your Old Testament, this group, this family of Levites, rebelled against Moses' authority back in Numbers 16, and thousands of them, the earth opened up and swallowed them up. Many of them died, along with a lot of the tribe of Reuben. And so this was a rather smaller group. We learn from Numbers chapter 3, verse 28, that there were 8,600 of this group at Sinai. But again, several thousand of them were killed in Numbers 16. They were in charge of the Ark of the Covenant, the furniture of the tabernacle, the altar, and the vessels of the tabernacle. That's what they were charged of moving when they moved. Now in verse 23, it's interesting. It mentions some cities from the tribe of Dan. Now you remember that originally Dan was given an allotment close to Judah and Simeon, down in the southern part of the Promised Land. You might want to see your map on the division of the Promised Land among the tribes. And Dan is way down south toward the Mediterranean next to Judah and Simeon. But as you know, that's also the Philistine area. And there was so much trouble with Dan winning their own area, fighting their way to win their own area, that Dan is going to move to the north. We find it in the book of Judges. And there's where the famous proverb, from Dan to Beersheba. Now Dan, it goes way to the north, above the Sea of Galilee. And so we say Dan to Beersheba, this southern city way down in the Negev, or the desert area of Judea. It refers to the whole Promised Land. But here is much earlier, and it's this southern tribal allocation that's mentioned. Now Gershom is also mentioned in Numbers 3:22, and at Sinai there were 7,500 of this particular tribal group. And they camped close to Ephraim, Manasseh, and they were in charge of the coverings and the curtains and the cords of the temple. You might want to see Numbers 3:25 and 26 for that mention. Then we come to the third group of priests mentioned in verse 34. Also, from Numbers 3:34, it says that at Sinai there were 6,200 of this particular family of the Levites, and they were in charge of the boards and the bars and the pillars and the sockets and the pins of the tabernacle, Numbers 3:37. And so you see these three main groups. Now in verse 41, it mentions specifically there are going to be 48 cities with their pasture lands, 1,000 cubits away from the city gate. And then in verse 43, so the Lord gave all of Israel the land which he had sworn to his fathers. And again, it goes back to that original promise to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12. That will subsequently be repeated in Genesis 15 and 17 and 21, and then be repeated to Isaac, and then repeated to Jacob, and then repeated through Moses to all of Israel. So this is the fulfillment of what God promised he would do. And the Lord gave them rest on every side, according to all that he had sworn to their fathers. You might want to see Deuteronomy 27 and 28. For the blessings that God's going to do, but the cursings that God will do if they don't keep his law. And no one at all of their enemies stood before them. God was with them and defeated all their enemies. And Yahweh gave all the enemies into their hand. Look at verse 45, very important verse. Not one of the good promises which the Lord had made to the house of Israel failed. All came to pass. Oh, folks, that's the hope of the Bible, is the promise of the Word of God. That when God speaks to us, we can bank on it. We can be confident that God does not change. There is no change in Him. The Father of lights, there's no variation, no shadows in Him. Jesus Christ, the same yesterday, today, and forever, reflects the Father's unchangeable character. I love Isaiah 55:11 that says, "My word does not go out from me void without accomplishing that which I purpose." Folks, when God says it, that settles it. Now, the Hebrews had to live by faith for those promises. God promised Abraham a son, but it was 13 years before the son came. God promised the people of Israel the promised land, but they had to get on their armor and walk around Jericho. God tells us what to do, and sometimes it doesn't make real good sense. Like make a replica of the snake in Numbers 21 and look at it and live. Well, that didn't make good sense. That wasn't medical procedure. God says, I want you to trust me. I want you to depend on me. I want you to take what I say seriously. Isn't that what the gospel's all about? It's foolishness that the death of one Jew should determine the eternal destinies of all creation, all men. Yet that's the way God planned it. Folks, the essence of the Bible is that God has revealed Himself. What He has revealed is true, and what He promises us, He will do. Amen? We just have to believe and trust and act in faith in the Word of God, the written Word and the living Word, Jesus Christ. I've enjoyed being with you. I'll see you again, same time, same place, next week. God bless.